Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for June 1st, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Mike Bonin, Mitchell Englander, and Bob Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin today's meeting. Members, I'd like to propose first, we have a number of routine reports. Although they're significant reports, they are routine, and I would like to propose as consent candidates items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Actually, Mr. McQuiston has cards on 5 and 7, so I'm going to take Mr. McQuiston's comments and we'll hold those items actually until afterwards. So that brings us 6, 8, 9, and 10. And on item 6, there is an amended ordinance that's before you. But if there's no comments or questions on those matters, I would ask that they be approved on consent.
I agree. What does the amendment do?
Okay. And without objection, that will be the action of the committee to approve items 6, 8, 9, and 10. We'll hold items 5 and 7 for the moment. We will also hold our closed session items. Actually, on closed session, members, item 3 is City Attorney Report regarding funding and term extensions for outside counsel contracts. Unless there's specific questions on those, I'd like to ask that that be approved on consent as well.
Can I just make a statement on it?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Just a statement on that, not a question, so we can go on consent. But I think last time we had that before us, we'd asked for totality of each contract and their cumulative totals, and to that to come into the current report. So if we can make sure that we get that with council as well, that'd be great.
Prior to council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Because I know we had that conversation last time and said, can we get the cumulative total?
And Haley, City Attorney's Office. I thought perhaps, I do recall that maybe that had applied to our citywide, the quarterly expenditure report. But if not, in any case.
That's probably the case.
Okay. But whenever you want it, I can provide it. So okay. If you'd like that prior to, we're set here for the 9th to go to council with this.
That'd be great.
Okay. So,
thank you.
So cumulative expenditures per contract.
Yes, great. Thank you. So if there's no objection, then we will approve item 3 as well, without objection. Item number 1 will be continued. That leaves only item number 2 for closed session. But before we get to closed session, I think we should move straight into the FSR so we can get both the FSR approved, but also get everybody who's waiting here for us to get back to their offices. So, members, as we usually do, well, first let's go ahead and hear the presentation of the FSR, and then as we usually do, I'll ask you to call Department Special, and if anybody is not called Special, we'll be releasing them to go ahead and go. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. Today we present the 2014-15 Year-End Financial Status Report. As you know, the city's fiscal year for 2014-15 began with improved budget performance and progress towards fiscal sustainability. Our July 1st reserve fund level of 7.45% better positioned the city to address the budgetary challenges that we encountered throughout the year. Our first FSR identified approximately $95.28 million in expenditure shortfalls and unbudgeted expenses. These were mainly due to shortfalls in police and fire attributed to unfunded or underfunded programs. As the deficit continued to decline, some of the gains were offset by unanticipated events throughout the year. By mid-year, our year-end shortfall was down to $72.41 million. However, due to anticipated savings in the Human Resource Benefits Fund and lower than projected petroleum and outside counsel expenditures, these additional savings were identified to supplement funds in the UB Reserve for Economic Uncertainties accounts. Further, the reserve fund was available to cover a portion of the shortfalls as well as interim budget requests. Subsequent to Mayor Council action on the mid-year FSR and a separate reserve fund appropriation to the liability claims account, By mid-year, this deficit was further reduced to $14.44 million. The year-end Fsr identifies a remaining $9.23 million shortfall, which is based on expenditures through the end of March. The remaining deficit is attributed to a slight increase in the fire department shortfall, a remaining shortfall in the liability claims account, and shortfalls in various general city purposes accounts. However, if approved, the recommendations in the year-end report will fully offset the remaining shortfalls. Further, barring any unanticipated events or significant borrowing, we expect to close the year with a strong reserve fund at 6.62%. To fully offset our remaining $9.23 million shortfall, this office recommends transfers of savings from tax and revenue anticipation notes and the Human Resource Benefit Fund. In addition, we recommend a transfer of $112,000 from the reserve fund. Regarding our projected revenue, our current year adopted budget assumed approximately $5.14 billion in general fund revenue. However, as part of the 2015-16 budget actions, this revenue projection was revised upward to approximately $5.18 billion, which is an increase of approximately $37.5 million. This variance contributes to the reserve fund year-end balance as unallocated revenue. At this time, there are no significant deviations from the revised budget. However, we do note in our report that business tax revenue through April is currently $14.3 million behind plan as a result of LA tax system delays in recording remittances in the financial management system. This system issue should be resolved before the close of the year and should not impact final revised revenue. Regarding our reserve fund balance is $340.1 million, which represents the 6.62% of the adopted general fund budget. The reserve fund balance for next fiscal year has been budgeted at 5.79% of the general fund, which takes into account the reserve fund transfer to the budget. Including the budget stabilization fund increases the city's total reserve for the current year from 6.62% to 7.9% of the general fund budget. Our report also highlights a series of issues of concern that we have been tracking throughout the year. Most of these are related to pensions litigation. We are also providing updates on new items that were recently added. We discussed the DWP litigation involving the power revenue transfer. We've also added a discussion on the gas users tax litigation. Under the case of Levinsky versus City of LA, the plaintiff has challenged the city's assessment of the gas users tax. The court has provisionally ruled in favor of the plaintiff, finding that existing language of the users tax is ambiguous as to whether it extends beyond the basic charge. The city attorney is now litigating the amount of refunds due to taxpayers. The value of the potential liability is under $10 million, with an additional $3.5 million in reduced gas users tax receipts annually. Our total budgetary adjustments recommended in this report add up to $123.5 million. Included in these transactions are approximately $25.94 million in prior year FMS and SMS encumbrances from fiscal year 2013-14 and earlier, which are recommended for exemption from the general fund encumbrance policy. These exemptions are based on the existence of legal obligations for these items. The bulk of the exemptions for FMS, which total $25.6 million, include the general city purposes, water and electricity accounts, and the police department. We also include recommendations for up to $26.3 million in reappropriations. Of this 26.3, 25.7 million impact the general fund. Finally, we have approximately $610,000 in reserve fund appropriations, about $112,000 for the current year, and about $500,000 for next fiscal year. We would also like to recommend amendments to this year-end FSR. The amendments have been provided to your city clerk. We're recommending the deletion of recommendation number 29E, which involves a reappropriation of $500,000 for that controller's contractual services account, as this is duplicative of a $500,000 reappropriation in the 2015-16 adopted budget footnotes for the controller. We're also recommending amendments to attachment 4 to increase the amount of transfers for the police department by $1 million. The revised attachment has been circulated to you and provided to your clerk. This concludes my comments. If you have any additional questions, we're available.
All right, thank you very much. Members, general questions before we get to departmental specific things? Greenfield. Just on encumbrances, we had over the years been pretty effective in reducing the amount of encumbrances, and last year at year-end the year-end FSR had almost $8 million in exemptions from the city policy on encumbrances. This year it's gone significantly up from that. What's the reason for that, and what impact is that likely to have on next year's budget?
I can answer part of that question. My colleague, Anna Mae Yutan, may have a little bit more information, but my understanding is that there are some, for example, with water and electricity, these are kind of long-standing, I wouldn't call them disputes, that are...
Correct. Anna Mae Yutan from the CAO. As you already know, you passed the general fund encumbrance policy, so we automatically disencumber encumbrances by July 1st, and we only leave like about a year's worth of encumbrances. So a lot of the times, departments still have invoices pending. It's just a matter of invoicing. So either there's like late in invoicing for the manufacturer.
I know what they are, but I'm saying year over year. Last year it was 7.8 million. This year it's 26 million in exemptions.
Yeah, even though the exemption went higher, it's mainly those exemptions are for 13, 14, and 14, 15 encumbrances. So anything older than that, we pretty much disencumbered it. And again, it's because of those late invoices coming. I should note also, though, that in terms of the encumbrances that we're releasing, based on the department's responses, we're releasing about 28 million in prior year encumbrances.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Members, let's go ahead and do our usual process of recommending departments to be called special. Mr. Blumenfield, why don't we start with you if you're ready?
Yeah, EWDD, street services, and the zoo.
Okay. Mr. Englander?
Animal services, fire department. That's it. I'm just going to go with the police department. I think I'm good.
Okay.
So just those two.
All right. Mr. Bunn? That's it? All right. So we will be directing questions to EWDD, Bureau of Street Services, the Zoo, Animal Services, the Fire Department, and DOT. Everybody else, thank you all very, very much. Thank you for participating in this. We appreciate your service. Okay, so we went in this order before. Let's go in this order this time. Why don't we start with Mr. Bonin and the Department of Transportation. So if I could ask DOT to come on up to the table, please. Mr. Bonin, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. A couple quick questions. One, sort of the framing of it. I noticed the report says that approximately 60% of the department's budgeted general fund revenue had been received as of April 2015, and that part of the reason it was so low was because of problems with the billing reimbursements from Public Works Accounting.
Sorry, I can barely hear you.
Sorry. Part of the reason for that low amount was because of problems with billing reimbursements from Public Works?
I can respond to that. Ida Rubio with the CAO. Typically, the department receives a lot of their related cost reimbursements in the second half of the year, so that's something that they're working on. The B permit billings, it's only a small portion of that. I think it's only about $1.2 million that's anticipated to be received. So the bulk of it is in other transactions, and a lot of it is due to the related costs that haven't been processed yet.
And that lag, that's something that we addressed in the next year's budget, right? Was that the position that Public Works, Mr. James, was looking for?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure what's going on with Public Works.
Councilmember, I believe you're correct. Jacob Buckshire with the Office of City Administrative Officer, we did include the council added position to address that issue for next year's budget.
All right. A question on the parking fine revenues. Those are down, and this report sort of speculates on what some of those causes may be. Are those definitive answers that those are the causes, or are we still trying to figure out what the causes are?
You mean as far as the Selwyn Hollins Department of Transportation? I think you're referring to the budgeted amount of revenue we were supposed to generate for parking citation versus what's actually being collected. And in the financial status report, it alludes to a couple of items, one being challenges with hiring staff and a couple of other things. And so, yes, we still feel it's a combination of things. As you may recall, if you look at historically the jump in the revenue from over the last 3 years, it has been pretty high, and maybe it was a target that wasn't as where it should be. So for next fiscal year, it is being reduced to a more reasonable number, and I believe next year it's 156 million.
Around there.
And where are we in the approval of next year's budget on filling the full and part-time vacancies that you need to get back up to where you were?
Well, we have positions that we can hire now, and the budget is changing it from, I believe it was 150 part-timers back down to 100, and then in exchange, hiring the full-time traffic officers. So the funding for that, do you recall if it was for a full year? Or?
We're approving unfreezes as they come in, so as people attrit out of the full-time positions, personnel is asking us to unfreeze so that they can fill those positions with part-timers. So it's just an ongoing process, and the minute they come in, we approve them.
Okay. On page 59, the second bullet says you're transferring $784,000 in interest from the Transportation Grant Fund to the Prop C Fund. What's that money for?
That is That was part of the Proposition C schedule. There's a line item in there that refers to interest that's accumulated in the TG fund, and we actually budgeted, I think, about $1.2 million. We're transferring $784,000 as part of this report. And DOT, that's the amount that had been collected as of the time of this report.
And what did that pay for?
That's just revenue that's received into the schedule.
Okay. In the final, your last bullet, you transfer $100,000 from local transportation fund, the bicycle cycle track account, to the salaries general account for year-end shortfalls based on labor charges. Those are labor charges that were done from working on bike programs?
Those are labor charges that were pulled from DOT's reporting system, where employees have been charging towards these specific work order numbers. It's my understanding there's two projects. One is on Alley Street, and the other one is a Reseda cycle track that was completed in April of 2015. So I can't tell you specifically which one these labor charges are for. Correct.
Bicycling, okay.
Yes.
All right, good. Just want to be sure. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Englander, what would you like to begin with? Animal Services?
Sure.
All right. Anything else for DOT?
No.
All right, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and bring up Animal Services next. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Janice Yu, Office of the CAO. I don't believe the department is here at the moment.
Yeah, so I just wanted to find out what was going on with the hiring for the positions. Let me see here. The canvassers. So we've run into a number of issues over the years of the hiring of the animal license canvassers, and have realized the revenue and the income coming in from those licenses, but then we've never been able to actually have the staffing to go after the canvassing. And so I know there's a lack of open lists, and wanted to find out what we're doing specifically to make sure that we're going to hire that staffing and actually do the canvassing.
The as-needed canvassers positions were added back in the budget. They were in the department several years ago,
Right.
But through the economic crisis, they were eliminated. The program was eliminated. They were brought back in the 2014-15 budget, and so the department worked to get those positions filled. One of the challenges was getting these people to pass their background checks, and because there is somewhat of an extensive process for that. And but from my understanding, they are making some progress there, and they will get the canvassers on.
Was it that they weren't necessarily passing the background checks, or was it that their testing what they were expiring? We've heard different stories.
When we added the positions this year, it essentially they had some existing lists that they were pulling from, but they did have to start over with adding new people as well, and so that kind of extended the process. And the further issue was the background checks after getting those new people on those lists.
Okay. Can you just make a note to add it back in, Mr. Chair, for the next FSR, just to track and see how we're doing on bringing those positions back in, and have we settled those issues in terms of getting them processed, and if they could just report back on the progress in the next FSR.
Have the department report on the status of filling those positions in the next FSR? Yeah, definitely.
We'll have the department
Make
do
a
that.
note of that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anything else for Animal Services members? Thank you. That'll bring up the Fire Department next.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Hello. First, let's see, it's pay. My first item is a question on page 15, number 17. We've got 17 new non-emergency light electric vehicles in the Fire Prevention Bureau. Was this requested originally in this year's budget? Because I don't remember it coming back as a request even during the budget deliberations. So this is page 15, item 17 under MICLA.
That was a new request that came in as part of the FSR.
Came in just out of there. Can we get a report back on it as well as what's the current Fire Prevention Bureau fleet at right now? I know one of the things that came up during the budget deliberations also in discussions were the actual total cumulative impact of MICLA overall and where we're at, and tapping out on MICLA and trying not to purchase also vehicles with MICLA. So one of the things we've asked the police department to do, well, most of those were for the black and whites, is to try to figure out how to pay with cash. The problem with fire department is they don't have asset forfeiture and other means to do those things. It's a little more difficult. But if we can just get an inventory of what are they replacing and how big is that fleet to begin with? And
These are new, so that they are not replacing anything. These are additional vehicles, but we
are
can't
these
provide.
take-home? Can we get a report back on what the vehicles are, what they're used for, and we're expanding
Is your focus just on FPB, Councilman?
just on that item?
Okay.
Well, I don't know what the 17 are for unless they're for other things as well. So just a report back on what those are. Because with those come added costs for maintenance and fuel and mechanics, and so we need to, if we're adding to the fleet, and it just comes through an FSR and didn't go through the budget deliberations or a plan, certainly didn't go through my committee. It's just a new item that I hadn't seen. I'd like to just know more detail about it, so we can get a report back on that. On page 19, one question on the AVL. There's been some discussions back and forth with completing that project, which I think is critically important for the automated vehicle locator systems. Do we know that since we haven't gone out to bid on a new CAD, I don't know that that is final yet or not, that whatever AVL systems we're going to put in place is actually going to be compatible? Because I've heard through some of the discussions on AVL that some are proprietary systems or some of the CADs don't recognize some of the systems and you get compatibility issues. And I want to just know what protections are we putting in place to ensure that there are not going to be those kinds of issues?
My understanding from Maggie Goodrich as well as the staff over at MFC is that the system that is going to be implemented will be convertible to whatever CAD system will be implemented in the future.
Does it limit it to what particular CAD systems we can go out on the market for?
My understanding is the answer is no.
Can we just get something in writing back? Or just
Sure.
file it away just to show? Okay, great. That'd be great. Just a letter on that would be great. And there was a note also that was on page 35, that there's a shortfall because of firefighters outside of the city. And if you can just elaborate on what that meant. It basically says here, savings have been offset by deploying firefighters outside of the city. That's on page 35 in the middle of the page, after the graph and the paragraph. And I wasn't sure if those were for very specific non-reimbursable mutual aid or sending firefighters or paramedics to other locations outside of California and disasters that have occurred. I'm not sure what that was referring to. If it's contracted work within the county that the fire department may be deployed to, I just wasn't sure what the reference was.
That's based on reimbursements that we are anticipating as a result of the mutual aid responses.
So those are all 100% mutual aid?
Well, in terms of that particular clause, that's what it's referring to.
Okay. So there's no other shortfalls outside of that mutual aid reimbursement, anticipated reimbursements that we're expecting?
No.
Are we on target to receive 100% of those funds, or do we have an idea of what the shortfall for reimbursements might be at this point?
The mutual aid that we provide is reimbursed by the state. There, on occasion, there are smaller agencies that we have mutual aid agreements with, and not all of our responses are subject to reimbursement by the smaller agencies.
That's all I had. Thank you.
All right. Anything else for the fire department members? Thank you very much. All right. Mr. Blumenfield, what's your pleasure?
Start with EWDD and
Okay.
John.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, noticed that obviously the very high vacancy rate, and wanted to get a sense of the reasons the department has such a high vacancy rate, 20%, what programs are being affected by the lack of staff, and what can be done to address this.
Shafi Amir from the CAO's office. I don't believe the department is here, but I know that they have had I checked actually and left a message for them as well, but I know that they have been carrying a vacancy rate in some of their economic development programs specifically, and they've had some turnover in their workforce development programs as well. They are in the process of filling many of the positions. Actually, they have received managed hiring approval and will be hiring, and so that will bring it down significantly, their vacancy rate, especially going into the fiscal year. They're in the process right now. These numbers that were in here were through, I believe, April, and they've received managed hiring authority since the beginning of the year, but they are filling some of those positions. They've had a lot of turnover that happened during the year as well. So that's what was happening is when they started the year, they had additional vacancies that happened and retirements. So they are in the process of filling those positions.
So, in essence, you're saying it's kind of an anomaly, and it's being fixed. And
right. I mean, the department this is their second year in existence, and they're kind of getting their feet off the ground, especially starting this year. They had some additional council positions that were given to them in economic development, I think a total of 5, and they're just in the process of filling them right now. So, and the department could probably give you more detail as to what might be, the delay or what's taking and their exact status. But I do know that they are filling those positions.
Great. I just wanted to get a pin in that, and just if there's something that we need to do to address it, because then we obviously want those positions to be filled.
Sure.
It's a very high percentage.
Right.
Vacancy.
It is.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else for EWDD members? All right.
Okay.
Street services. Street services.
Nose dive. Just tripped.
No you all right? None the worse for wear. Attaboy. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So on street services, the 22.8 million surplus now identified for this fiscal year represents a change from the $5 million deficit that we had in the mid-year FSR. So can you tell us where the shortfalls were anticipated in the mid-year FSR, and elaborate on the dramatic changes that occurred in order for the Bureau now to have the surplus? And is there something we should be aware of in that shift?
Sure. I think I can answer that, Council Member. Joe Cruz, Assistant Director with the Bureau of Street Services, and I'm joined by Victoria Villagustin, my Chief Management Analyst. First and foremost, the Bureau of Street Services is a construction organization. That makes us a little bit different than other departments in that our salaries expense is almost equivalent to our expense dollars. So for every dollar that I spend in salary, I have $1 in expense costs. At the time that we projected the $20 million surplus for the year end, we had approximately 200 vacancies. About 60 of those vacancies are being held vacant to meet our salary savings requirement. So that would allow us to proceed with potential hiring of 140 positions. The average salary in the Bureau of Street Services is approximately $70,000 across the board. If you multiply the 140 vacancies by the average salary of $70,000, you'll arrive at a figure of about $10 million in salaries. So going back to that $1 in salary cost versus and $1 in expense, you arrive at a surplus at the end of the year of about $20 million. And so that's how we arrive at that particular amount. The projected $5 million shortfall at the mid-year was based on the funding provided for our pavement preservation program. The pavement preservation program at the beginning of the fiscal year was funded for 2,200 lane miles, and we were asked to do 2,400 lane miles. So we started the year with limited funding. We were asked to identify efficiencies so that we could achieve the 2,400 lane mile goal. We requested the UB funding, which is part of the funding that would have allowed us to get to 2,200 funded lane miles. And that's the basis for having requested that money at the mid-year.
So we're going to get to the 24?
We're absolutely going to hit the 24. As of today, we're 95% of that program complete.
Okay. So in terms of getting the surplus, is there anything we should be concerned about that's not getting done?
There are some projects that are going to continue into next year. Again, the pavement preservation program, we will complete that particular program with the funding that was provided. The money that's actually being returned is comprised of several programs. We were provided with some funding for capital improvement expenditures, sidewalk repair, some special projects for the harbor, block grant projects, and funding for council office discretionary projects.
That's where the savings is coming from?
Yes, that's where the savings is coming from.
That those aren't getting done?
They are not getting done. We'll ask for that money to be reappropriated so that we can continue those projects in the coming year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on street services, members? I'm not sure I understood all of that. So there's, you've realized savings because there's a lot of positions that haven't been filled, but there's a shortfall on the salaries overtime account. And I know part of that is paying down overtime that's already owed. But I want to make sure that we're not falling into a situation where we're paying more in overtime than we need to be because we're not hiring positions that are already budgeted fast enough.
We've been working with the CAO throughout the year to get a hiring plan in place. That's in place now. And with the 15-16 budget and the managed hiring committee being suspended, we are aggressively pursuing filling of all of our regular positions, and we expect the overtime to be mitigated in the coming year. But the use of the overtime was a direct result of having a significant number of vacancies.
Yeah. At some point, that doesn't seem like a cost-effective way to go, to realize salary savings by not hiring people and then spending more than you're budgeted in overtime.
I would agree, Councilmember. The other side effect of that is that our crews have been working virtually every weekend. I think you've seen the work in all of your districts, and they're getting burned out. And that's one of our goals in the coming year is to bring on board those regular authority positions so that we can avoid the use of the overtime.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mr. Hale, let's keep our eye on that as well, and maybe in the next FSR we'll see how that situation has been developing. So, because that's something we're going to want to be monitoring, and then if there's something that if there's steps that we need to be taking that we're not already taking to kind of expedite that process, I think we're making some progress, as you say, with changes in managed hiring and some other things we're doing in HR and otherwise. But those positions have to be filled.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Thank you very much. Anything else, members? Okay. That brings us then to the zoo.
So, thank you. And on this one, we talked a little bit about this in budget, but we have lower than anticipated admissions revenues, and I wanted to understand why that's the case in this. Does it mean our marketing plan is not working as advertised, or what are the reasons for that?
May Kwan, Director of Administrative Services with the Zoo. With the recent approval of Amendment Number 4 with the Glaza Marketing MOU, we've added revenue from nighttime events, nighttime ticketed events, which will bring our revenue close to meeting the target for the year.
And I appreciate that, but that doesn't answer the question, which is we have the lower revenues. And the question is, why? We have the new marketing plan. We had all the promises that it would produce revenue without having to go to the additional ticket sales. The ticket sales are great. We're going to get them, and that'll be another way. But what happened? How come we're not?
The Glaza marketing staff is looking at the data from the last 2 years to see where they can focus their advertising and marketing for the paid attendance to bring that up.
I appreciate that, but
right.
That obviously so we don't. There's not an answer to that question, I assume, at this
right.
point.
We'd have to have Glaza come address that.
Okay, because I think it's worth exploring this. This has been sort of an ongoing question about how that's working in budget. I mean, I think it may have something to do with the relationship between the admissions and the membership and all the rest, but to date, I haven't had any good answers as to why, and I've been asking the question in one form or another.
Councilmember Terry Sauer with the CAO. As part of the business and marketing plan and the MOU, there are reporting requirements for both Glaza and the Zoo. The Zoo and Glaza are working on their report backs in accordance with the MOUs, and those will be coming through the policy committee. So at the point at which those are presented, we can make sure to include you and make sure that you have the information that you need.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, members? Anything else on the FSR generally? We do have some amendments. Have those been circulated? Oh, okay.
Chair, there is one amendment from the CLA's office to address current expenditure patterns for eligible costs in the council office. I believe it's been passed out to all the members.
Okay. So then with the amendments that are before you, members, I think we'll entertain a motion to approve the FSR.
A motion to approve the FSR as amended.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, the FSR is approved. Thank you very much. All right, so before we go into closed session then, we'll go ahead and take items number 5 and 7. Mr. McQuiston, come on forward to speak on both of those items, please. Find out. Okay, Mr. McQuiston, go right ahead.
Jim McQuiston. Both of my comments are in. One of them I'm going to go down and give it to the finance because I think they can take care of it themselves. That's the one about this cheat. And it's been going on for a long, long time, and I think we ought to do the right thing. I don't think anybody here wants to keep anybody else's money. The other one is kind of a late thing that's come up. In other words, the California Supreme Court, in a really momentous decision, talked about actually bids. But what they said was, we just now looked at Prop 218 very carefully and found out that we're doing it all wrong. And after this, everything is going to be different. It's a sea change. And what they said was the burden of proof to prove that you're legal is falling on the city or county and not on the person who's objecting to what the city's doing. That's momentous. And some of these things I'm really kind of nervous about. I think we ought to look at how we're justifying these things. And I bring this up because I don't want to see a lot of money spent on litigation. Maybe we can get the city attorney to look at this a little closer and get some more foundation so the people will know how to get up these special funds, and whether or not we have to return the special funds if we actually have a surplus, or whether we can actually hang on to them. I think that's something we really need to look at.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. McQuiston. So, members, items 5 and 7 are now before us. Is there any objection to approving those items? Seeing none, items 5 and 7 are approved. And without objection, members, I'd like to reconsider item number 3 because the city attorney would like to propose some technical modifications.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, Ann Haley, it was such an unexpected surprise to go on consent that I failed to share both. It's a substantive amendment, too. It's just that one of the matters for which we requested funding out of the UB will actually be paid for by the sanitation department because the case emanates from that department. So it would be recommendation number 1, and the transfer from the UB would be $1.295 million versus $1.475 million, because that 180,000 will come not from our UB but from the sanitation department.
Great. Better still.
So I guess is that sufficient for them? And that increases our savings too.
It does indeed.
Yes.
It does indeed. So with that amendment then, if there's no objection, members, item 3 will be deemed approved as amended.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that then brings us to our final item, item number 2, which is our closed session item. So we will now proceed into closed session. Thank you all very much. Oh, is there any general public comment? Seeing none, general public comment is closed.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not on item 2, this is the exit of the room.
We're good. Thank you. All right, we are now back in open session, and there being no further action before the committee, we are adjourned.